Greetings and salutations, friends and fellow gamers, and welcome back to our series on So You Want to Be a GM. Once more, I am GM Dave, your man behind the screen, and today we'll be continuing with part 3 in the ongoing series, talking with your players. Now, I want to apologize before we get started about the late upload for this video. My goal with these series and future ongoing series that don't involve vlogs is to get my videos up by 9 a.m. every Monday and Wednesday morning. Unfortunately, that really wasn't possible this time. Normally, I like to get my videos recorded and edited the night before and have them uploading overnight so that way they can be ready to go at 9 o'clock the next morning. But thanks to an issue with a burst water heater and some leaking in the room next to it that required my wife and I to rip up all the carpet from that bedroom, well, that wasn't able to happen. But nevertheless, we are here, we are back, so let's continue. As a GM, your role in the game goes a few steps just beyond putting together and narrating your games to you and your players. While these aspects will likely make up the majority of your time as a GM, they are hardly the only sides of the task. Indeed, questions that run along the lines of, one of my players keeps doing X and the others don't like it, or player X keeps disrupting the game and arguing with player Y, what should I do, are arguably the most common that I see new GMs ask the more experienced among us. The answer usually boils down to the same basic thing. Talk to your players about it in order to work out a solution. Today's video is largely going to be focused on this and one other aspect of the Talking to Your Players challenge, that aspect being discussing what you and your players want out of the game in advance. So let's begin with the latter half and move on to part 1, discussing expectations. As touched on in the previous 2 entries in the series, you should discuss the sort of game you and your players want to play before beginning to design anything. Understanding your players' expectations as well as making sure they understand yours is of the utmost importance when it comes to making sure your games run as smoothly as possible. I personally would go so far as to say that solidifying your mutual expectations will comprise the foundation upon which your games are built. In my experience, the best way to start is to consider the expectations that you have of your players first. How do you expect them to handle themselves at the table? How attentive should they be during other players' turns? Will you permit distracting items like cell phones or laptops to be out and used during the game? How long will you permit out-of-character or side-character discussions? What about crassness or the discussion of sensitive topics? Will you permit these, or would you rather have your players sidestep them altogether in order to avoid the risk of arguments that could derail the game? What sort of decorum do you expect your players to have with each other? How should they handle those times when friction arises, by coming to you individually or with all parties involved present? Don't just lay out expectations surrounding your players, though. What do they need to know about you? What is your comfort level with some of these things? And what sort of games and systems are you the most comfortable with running? Clarifying your personal comfort zone is especially important for beginning GMs, as it's going to allow you to approach the portions of GMing that you're not quite comfortable with yet on your own terms. Asking these sorts of questions is also going to allow you to set up that great starting point with your players. By clearly and politely establishing your expectations with players ahead of time, you're going to be able to create a flexible set of guidelines by which they and you alike can approach the speed bumps that you'll inevitably run into during your games. Note that this does not involve expectations that you have surrounding the game itself, such as where and when you'll play, what the system will be, what style of game, and other game statistics such as, oh, what's their starting health this character is going to be, how are you going to handle their character stats, so on and so forth. This is because we're not really ready to establish this just yet. We are ready to move on to your players' expectations, though. And in so doing, you should begin to get some ideas of the type of games that you can safely run for your group. However, your players are not always going to have the clearest view of what their expectations are right off the bat, so you're going to need to ask them a few simple questions to get them thinking about their wants of the game. First of all, what sort of game do they want to play? And give some suggestions. Classic fantasy adventure like Tolkien, something that runs along the lines of horror, perhaps Lovecraftian or something supernatural, comical fantasy adventure, a mystery, westerns, superheroes, science fiction, so on and so forth. Second, what systems would they like to use? Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Savage Worlds, Fantasy Flight Star Wars, Call of Cthulhu. Just make sure that when you offer your systems, that these are systems that fit the kind of games that they've already said they want to play. 3. What sort of character concepts do they already have in mind, if any? 4. What times and times of day are they available, and for how long? 5. Will you be playing online or in person? If you're going to be playing online, what are the platforms you're going to be using? And if you're playing in person, where are you going to be playing? 6. If you are playing in person, how are you going to handle the snacks, drinks, and meals? And 7, most important of all, once you have answered all these questions, make sure you all can and will adhere to these commitments. After all, you can't have a game if no one's showing up. With these and similar questions in your arsenal, clarifying the expectations of everybody at your table, yourself included, should become much easier. However, clarifying your expectations is not the only trick here. You and your players also need to adhere to them as best you can so that you can provide the best experience possible for everyone at your table. But what about the times when these things don't work out? What do you do when you hit those speed bumps that make the game more difficult for everyone? It's at this point that we look to part 2, arbitrating the rules. As the GM, you are the final and ultimate arbiter of the rules at your table. What does this mean? In the simplest terms, what you say goes, no matter what may be in the books. This does not give you free rein to act as a tabletop dictator, though. It is important to act consistent in your judgments so your players don't see your rulings as unfair. Remember, you're there to enforce the rules, but also there to make the game fun. So what should you do if faced with a problem at the table? While it will vary based on the problem, these first few steps I've found are pretty universal. 1, you want to politely and calmly speak up and regain control of the table. 2, you want to state your ruling on the matter. Be clear, be concise, and remain polite and calm while doing so. You don't want to come off as attacking your players. 3, be willing to discuss the choice with your players, but clarify that you will do so after the game. And 4, make sure that everyone understands your ruling, and finally resume play. These steps will help you to get a handle on most problems in the moment, but they will require your follow-through. If a player does want to discuss a ruling after the fact, make sure you allow them to do so. When arbitrating, it's every bit as important to hear your players out as it is for you to clearly explain your reasoning behind your decision. If you've made a change to the rules in the books, for example, perhaps they found that the way the rule was already written will actually work better for your game than you initially realized, simply because maybe you misunderstood that rule. By allowing your players to have a say, you're also opening yourself up to the opportunity to see your game improved in ways that you might not have expected or thought of. But what if the issue you face is actually caused by a disruptive player? Or if you have a player who comes to you complaining about another player's actions? In situations like these, you are going to want to slightly change your approach. 1, you're going to want to speak with the concerned player, and preferably at first, you want to do so in private. If someone is being repeatedly disruptive, pull them aside after the game. If, on the other hand, it's someone who has a complaint about another player, let them approach you, and then offer to speak with them privately after everyone else has left. 2, listen to what they have to say on the matter, and listen intently. Remember, you're there to help resolve the issue in as smooth a manner as possible. The sooner it's worked out, the smoother it's worked out, the sooner everyone can get back to having fun playing the game. 3, bearing their side of the story in mind, issue your ruling and the reasoning behind it. If it's a disruptive player constantly distracted by their phone, for example, you can tell them politely they need to keep their phone put away unless they absolutely need it to look up something relating to the game. Clarify that their distraction is slowing the game down and is pretty rude to the other players. If it's a player coming to you with a problem caused by another player, inform them that you'll speak to that player about the issue as soon as you can, usually either before or after the next session. 4, follow through on your ruling. Remember, remaining consistent with your decisions is key to making sure that your players respect the rulings that you put forth. If you see the problem crop up in game again, politely point it out and ask them to stop. And if they don't stop, well, move on to step 5. 5, if the problem persists, do not be afraid to get firm. If the problem is serious enough, such as a player continually disrespecting your rulings by being disruptive or actively harassing you or the other players, you may need to go as far as asking them to leave the table. While this is by far the least enjoyable part of being a GM, it is nonetheless a trigger we sometimes must pull, not only for the health of our games, but sometimes even for the health of our friendships. Not all of us are fit to sit at the same table. Sometimes even the closest friends don't really mesh well in this kind of setting. Don't be afraid to pull the trigger if you have to, but again, remember, if you do so, be calm, be polite, and be clear about your reasonings. Bearing these steps in mind can, and hopefully will, go a long way to help retaining the fun, healthy environment we all want in our games. That being said, while these points should cover most of the issues you're going to run into, the problem of interpersonal friction still remains a very complicated one that is going to require a greater level of depth to truly get a handle on. As such, do expect that we will delve further into this in a future video. That's all I have for you today, friends and gamers. As usual, I hope that you found the video to be helpful and informative. If you liked it, please feel free to share it around. It would help me immensely into getting this channel up and running properly. Don't be afraid to comment as well. I welcome discussion with open arms, and I would love to read your questions, suggestions, and even your own experiences with this aspect of GMing. Once again, friends and gamers alike, I'm GM Dave, your man behind the screen, signing off. Roll high, role play well, and game on.